Hi, I'm Chris. This is Ross. We just got done watching the debate hosted by Fox News, and we're here to give our post-debate reaction. Ross?
Yeah, I think, it's pretty typical, not just of Fox News, but most of the mainstream media, their treatment of Dr. Ron Paul. They came at him with guns blazing. They're not giving him nearly as much time as the other candidates. I noticed at one point they said to Rick Santorum, take all the time you need. And this was just immediately after they had cut off Dr. Paul. I don't remember the exact amount of time he had, but they were saying that he had overstepped it. And I was really happy to see Dr. Paul immediately after that come back and say, yeah, I'm going to need more than 30 seconds to respond to this question about the NDAA, which he's been so vocal against. And they were not even going to ask him about it. And I think also if you look at the Twitter response at the end of it, I was honestly very shocked and surprised that Fox News even aired that, because they're usually so biased against Dr. Paul. But if you looked at it, I mean, the poll said, like on the right, Dr. Paul was favorable in almost every single category, and I think what stuck out most to me was the foreign policy. And Dr. Paul obviously, is just completely differentiated himself from the rest of the field when it comes to our national defense and how we should return to a constitutional way of approaching how we go to war and things like that, and cutting back on military spending but not defense spending, making sure we have a strong military that is walk softly and carry big sticks. You don't have to go and start all these wars unnecessarily. And he did an excellent job, I think, as apparent by the actual people's response on Twitter. And, the media pundits can try to spin it every which way, and they're, of course, going to. But I think Dr. Paul, he's up there speaking the truth. He's not, and maybe you comment on this, Chris, I mean, he's definitely not the most polished individual, but he's got the truth on his side, and I think that comes through, even despite all the attempts to shroud the truth and defame his character.
Yeah, one of the things that I definitely have become accustomed to in the short time that I've been able to follow Congressman Paul is how consistent and principled he is, even when it's unpopular and even when it's inconvenient. That's one thing that I tell voters in each state that me, Ross, and the guys have been canvassing in and campaigning in is that, if you're concerned about character and integrity, you will definitely have a president in Congressman Paul who sticks by his guns. And that's so crucial when, if we make our decisions based upon circumstances rather than principle, then we will always be changing with the wind. And we don't want that type of change. That's not change we can believe in, but unfortunately I think that in a lot of cases that's the change that Obama brought, and that's the change that Mitt Romney will bring. Change where, I'm going to change what I stand for because the circumstances have changed. The circumstances have changed. Instead of, here's what I believe, and if there's something wrong with what I believe in, then I can revise that. I can adjust that. I can adjust my philosophy to what's just, so that when the time comes for me to step up and lead my country, I'm now bringing the best tested, the most proven, and the most battle-ready philosophy to govern the country. And that takes being bold. That takes standing for things. That takes experimenting. That takes doing research, doing homework, learning history, finding out what works and what hasn't, and then through your own independent analysis, coming up with the best assessment that's very objective on what is the best way to go forward, and then saying, okay, here's where I'm going to stand. And of course, always being open to somebody else's analysis because you may have blind spots and whatnot, and you need to take those into account. Now, that's a more pragmatic approach, but unfortunately, being that approach held by Congressman Paul, is seen as, oh, you're too divisive. That was one thing that I heard one of the panelists say when they gave their reaction by Brett Baer, is that, he was talking about Congressman Paul as being divisive on foreign policy. And, Congressman DePaul, for those who believe him when he talks about that there's a difference between military spending and defense spending, and how just spending money overseas isn't defense, and how going to war without the constitutional approval of the Congress as far as the declaration of war, that it's wrong to go to war without a congressional declaration of war. Those who believe Congressman Paul and who support him, including the active duty military, which, by the way, gives 2 to 3 times more than all the other candidates put together just from active duty military, then, you know, we should listen to him. I mean, the troops aren't stupid. Now, imagine if here it is, you know, you're 500 miles away from home and you can't personally defend your wife and your child, but you're entrusting a man to provide the best defense for your wife and child while you're abroad. Are you going to support somebody who would put your wife and child, which you're not there to personally defend, in danger? Of course you wouldn't support such a person. So therefore, if active duty military who are not here to support their, who are not here to defend their families personally, support Congressman Paul, then obviously they don't believe that Congressman Paul is a danger or a threat to the defense of their families here at home. But that's never that conclusion, that thought process is never introduced. That's never talked about. It's never looked at it that way. And it's deliberate, unfortunately. It's unfortunately deliberate. The intelligence of the soldiers, the decision-making of the soldiers is always discounted, it's discriminated against, or it's completely ignored. Quite frankly, even though Republicans who say that they're completely behind the troops won't listen to the troops, here it is that the troops, with what little money they have, are sitting here giving it disproportionately to a candidate, and yet they're not even being taken seriously. But you know what? That doesn't surprise me, because here it is, you can have Goldman Sachs and all these other companies that were bailed out give to both candidates of both major parties, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, and nobody listens to them. Nobody pays attention and says, wait a sec, Goldman Sachs and these other companies that were getting bailed out, which have a disproportionate advantage if we continue our current economic policies, are supporting both candidates. They're supporting Mitt Romney. Wait a minute, there probably is a correlation here. There's probably some there's a connection here between them supporting Mitt Romney and the policies that Mitt Romney supports. But nobody ever makes that connection. Nobody even talks about that connection in the mainstream media. And there's a specific reason for that. The reason is because this is the same mainstream media that led you into the housing bubble. This is the same mainstream media that led you into the stock market bubble. This is the same mainstream media that led us into the Iraq War, where there was no weapons of mass destruction, where there was no Al-Qaeda. This is the same mainstream media that led you to vote for President Obama. The same President Obama who was supposed to bring hope and change, hope and change, hope and change. Well, we know what kind of hope and change that we got. We're now hoping for more change because the change that we got was not good enough. So here it is now that it's the same mainstream media who's always claiming to be on your side, who always claiming to be looking out for you. But this is the same mainstream media that is willing to demagogue against, who's willing to criticize, ostracize anyone who speaks against their things, who speaks against the messages that they want to send out. And they don't discredit them through intelligence, through reason, or through understanding. They discredit them through smears, through labels. That's how they do this thing. We're not going to debate Ron Paul on the issues, or we're not going to debate him on the reasoning behind his policies and his philosophy. It's far easier to simply call him something. That way, when we call him something, you at home who have lives, who have families, who have values, you just know how to look at him, because we want you to look at him that way. Why? Because he's saying something different from what we're saying. The mainstream media has failed you over and over and over again. And that's whether you're a Democrat, that's whether you're a Republican, and that's whether you're an independent. It doesn't matter which party you say you're from, which side of the political spectrum you say that you're on. This is the same mainstream media that failed you. And now they're just like they're willing to sleepwalk us into financial bubbles, sleepwalk us into credit crisis, they're willing to sleepwalk us into electing people who don't have our best interests at heart. And yet here it is again, they're doing the exact same thing. And the reason why we're making this video is because we can't let them get away with it again. We cannot let this country be molded, shaped, and the course of this country be directed by the path that they choose. Because it's been proven over and over again that the path that the mainstream media sets this country on is always a disaster. It is always a disaster. So let me tell you something. If the mainstream media is saying one thing, it's in your best interest to believe another. It's in your best interest to doubt it. And, it just, it gets under my skin when, I hear good people, when I talk to good people on the ground here in South Carolina, in Iowa and New Hampshire, the states that we've been to before, talk about, well, this is what I've heard. This is what I've heard on the news. This is what they told me. It's unfortunate because we're all working our behinds off to do, to live the lives that we want to live, to fulfill our dreams, to make sure that our children have the shot at fulfilling their dreams, to make sure that our friends, are not just left out here, by the wayside. There are even, of course, Christians who are in all types of ministries and churches who are about God's will and doing God's will and don't want God's will to be neglected. So because we're so busy taking care of our business, unfortunately, there are people who are paying attention. And they are the same corporations who are molding the message that you hear as news. And it is not in their best interest for you to take the time out and to think about the message that they're sending you. And to think that, wait a sec, is this message true? Is this message really what's in my best interest? Nobody is even thinking about these things. And, one of the things that I just really want to say is that if you just take the time to sit down and think, they know that your common sense is too powerful for them. They know that your common sense and your ability to reason is too powerful. And if you were to have the time and to put in the work and the dedication of finding out what's real and what's not on your own, not trusting them, listen, you already know that if you're on YouTube, that proves that you don't depend upon the mainstream media to tell you what's true and what's not, to tell you what's right and what's wrong. So I just encourage you that from now on, come to your own conclusion about things. And coming to your own conclusion simply does not mean, here's what I've heard, so here's what I believe. No, coming to your own conclusion means listening to all sides of the story, even the side that they don't think is credible, even the side that they try to paint as being crazy and loony. Listen to that side. Investigate their reasoning. And if you find out that their reasoning is false, then you can discredit them based upon reasoning and understanding, based upon intelligence, but not based upon emotion, not based upon labels, not based upon smears. You have the opportunity to take this country in a new direction from where you are. You don't have to get on television to change this country. You can simply start reasoning, start doing your own homework, start doing your own research, and begin to develop your own opinion and your own conclusion based upon principles and facts instead of based upon simply by what you hear. And I know, when it comes to, the times that we're in right now, it's just so pivotal because we have an opportunity to elect somebody who will bring true change for all of us. As it stands right now, I feel that when any of the mainstream networks talk about the candidates, it's always about what affects this candidate. Well, how does this Bain Capital thing make Mitt Romney look? Who cares about Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney is not running to be president of Mitt Romney. He's running for president of the United States. So how does Bain Capital affect 320 million Americans should be the question. They always ask questions as far as, well, how do you think this will affect Latino voters? As far as Juan Williams, I believe it was. He was talking about, well, how do you think that this will affect Latino voters with your so hardline anti-immigration stance, Mitt Romney? Well, it's not about Latino voters. Mitt Romney. The better question would have been, Mitt Romney, tell us what makes your immigration policy the best for the United States. That would have been a much better question, because now it applies to how your immigration policy reflects on all of us, not how it reflects on you as a candidate. It's not about you as a candidate. It's about how your decisions will reflect on all of us. And that's something that the mainstream media never takes into account. If you notice, all of their questions are very leading, especially when it comes to Congressman Paul, because they have a specific theme that they want to paint Congressman Paul as. He's crazy, he's not in your best interest, he's a threat, and he's a danger. Now, usually if the mainstream media says that message about someone, it's because that mainstream media understands that that someone is this way towards them. He's a threat to them. He's a danger to them. He's kooky for them, because they can't understand how a man could be this principled, even if he gets booed, even if he votes against something that's very popular, but yet Congress has no constitutional authority to make a law regarding it. People don't understand that. Wait a sec. You mean to tell me that in the time where we have made it the trend that if you see a circumstance that you go against what the law says, you're telling me you're not willing to follow that trend? That's the true trend. That we obey the law sometime, but when we judge best, we disobey the law. And Congressman Paul understands we can't send a mixed message. That's the source of our problems. Republicans want to talk about, well, let's obey the law when it comes to, when it comes to domestic policy. Congress shouldn't be doing these things for people here at home because it's unconstitutional. But at the same time, these are the same Republicans who don't have a problem with us doing things overseas, which the Congress has no constitutional authority to do. Which the President doesn't have any constitutional authority to do. So here it is, you have this double standard. And the reason why you have a double standard regarding the law is because you want to do what you want to do, even if the law says you can't do it. And so we make these circumstances, these special cases, so to speak. Well, we're going to make a special case and give the president authority to go to war whenever he wants to because we're afraid. Or we're going to give the Democrats special authority to create all these programs where the government promises to pay for things regardless of how high the price goes and regardless of if they have money, because we don't want people to not have things. So here we have people choosing which law they'll decide to obey in which circumstance and which case. And here it is, the bottom line is, in both cases, when it comes to the Republicans, we're made less safe. Even though they have fear, we're made less safe. And even when it comes to the Democrats, they want to help us get everything that we want, but we become more poor. So in both cases, if we stay inside the limits of the law, which is the Constitution, and Congressman Paul is a veteran, so after all these years, this man still takes his oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States very seriously. And so me and Ross are making a personal appeal to South Carolina voters to really support the only congressman, the only candidate in the race who understands the Constitution, who knows what it means to protect and defend the Constitution, and I thank you so much for your time.